Hi everybody, in this video we're going to start adding in some base texture information to our metal. So let's get started into that. Basically the thing that we want to do is start to add in just a little bit of variation to this surface. We want to start making it look a little bit interesting. Now one thing you'll notice is actually we've got a little bit of missing information in here. So what we do want to do is actually go into our rock and add in just one little element here, a paint layer into our mask. This will allow us to just start to paint in where this area should be. Now, in fact, actually, we could use one of our different kind of painting selections here, which is by polygon. So by selecting this, we're able to actually paint on polygons themselves, which is really handy in this case. Let's just pull this down to black and use polygon mode, and we can basically just click individual polygons. Just drag a little bit here. Select these. You just want to make sure you don't click too many. Sometimes it's easier to do it with a mouse, as the clicking is just a little bit easier to do in some cases compared to a standard tablet, which I normally use. Now, if you select certain areas that you don't want, just make sure you select this back to white, and you can start to re-select that information just with single clicks of your mouse. You'll be able to reselect those areas and get the information that you're actually going for. And that'll be just perfect. That means we're only selecting the parts that we need, and our metal is now set up the way that it should be in this case, in a much more effective kind of manner. Now, if you do have any sort of bake errors like this, where certain information is collected where it shouldn't be, just feel free to rebake. Let's just jump over here. Rebake your textures with potentially a somewhat lower max rear or frontal distance. You can test those out and find out which one works for you to get that going. But oftentimes, if you don't see those things from further away, it can just work out just fine. But that's fine. We've got that rock set up now, and we've got our metal showing up where it's supposed to. So let's add in some information here. Well, what we want to do is just keep some of this base color the way that it is, but maybe we want to add a little bit more of a roughness kind of texture to it, similar to our reference. So let's add in a fill. Now in this case, we're going to turn off color, height, metal, normal on all of these things, and we just want to add in maybe more of a rough kind of texture to this. But we want it to have an actual material quality at the same time. So I'm going to look for Grunge 012. The thing is this is a grunge map that is really, really nice. It's got some scratches in it. It's got some kind of believability to it. I found this in one of the other smart materials. So we're just going to drag this on here. And you'll see it looks absolutely terrible. It is absolutely not what we want in this case. But there's a few things that we can do to make this work a little bit better and keep our layers in a much better organized manner. We could do this in a variety of different means, but this is a nice clean way of doing it. So what we're actually going to do is just edit the blending mode of our channel here. So what we want to do is actually just go over up here in our layers palette to roughness. What we're doing here is now actually changing the blending mode of our roughness rather than anything else, and even its opacity. So for one, we could actually bring this down quite a bit. Its intensity goes down a lot. We also want to press C at the moment here. Just go over to our roughness channel so we can see what we're looking at here. I'd like to invert my result here so that everything gets a little bit darker, and I want to set this to darken. Where are we here? Darken min. So what this means is that the underlying value that we see here, right here, is going to be our underlying surface, and everything else in this other area is going to be sort of what shows up underneath. And we could still reduce the opacity of this so that we don't get so much contrast difference. And what we get out of that is a little bit of surface variation on here that's not too noticeable or too noisy and gross. We do want to increase that tiling just a little bit more here as well, so that some of that noise can be just a little bit more interesting. We can also just adjust that balance here a little bit more, maybe even lower that contrast to something just quite a bit more natural. That way, what we start getting here is just a little bit more balanced information. So we're seeing just a little bit of noise built up into this. We could even increase some of the contrast here a little bit so that certain areas are really shiny and certain areas are quite a bit more worn down. That'll work really nicely for us in this case. And if we're not quite sure about that shape, we could randomize this a few more times to just see what kind of different effects we get. Having that contrast down much lower, I think, is pretty helpful in this case. We could just brighten this up. Basically, as we brighten this, as we increase this balance, basically we're making that underlying surface a little bit shinier than before. The higher we go with this, the shinier it goes. So we can see here, if we just go into C, basically going from full black, or if we lower that darkness, it's basically just going to be hiding anything else that's there. So any white information basically becomes transparent when it's set to being darkened. And so that just means our underlying surface, whatever this value is here for our roughness, could basically be much shinier or much rougher, and all of that would still actually work really, really nicely in contrast with one another. We basically just get a really nice kind of base, rough kind of detail going on as this surface of our metal. And that's great for us. That keeps things kind of nice and consistent to start with, and already pretty interesting. For our next video, we're going to be diving into how we can start making this metal look a little bit more old and worn down with a little bit of color variation.